Hi guys, Jan Morex here from 3dshaker.com. Welcome to my new tutorial in which I will lead you through the process of creating nature close-up renders in Blender. Fast-paced videos cover the details of all necessary technical aspects, including creating materials, lighting, rendering, and a bit of post-processing. However, this tutorial aims to teach you more than just a step-by-step process. My goal is to reveal to you also my reasoning behind this project so you can understand why I made certain decisions. I believe that after watching it, you will be able to use acquired knowledge for your next projects. I spent the last few months exploring the techniques of making close-ups nature shots and looking for the ways how to achieve the best results. Then I put it all together and this tutorial is the outcome. I'm using Blender 2.82 and as a renderer I'm utilizing Octane engine. This tutorial is designed primarily for intermediate Blender users who are familiar with the main Blender tools and want to gain new skills and learn advanced techniques for making realistic close-ups shots. At the beginning of this tutorial, I'm going to give you a quick overview so you can get an overall idea about the project, individual models, and how the scene was made. Then we will analyze the renders that I made in the preparation phase for this tutorial, and with their help, I will introduce you to a few composition rules. After that, we jump to Blender and prepare all the necessary assets that we will need for the project. I will show you how to simulate a basic tree with the Groove add-on, prepare variations of twigs, and create the perfect leaves material. I will also demonstrate how to acquire models from Quixel Megascans and prepare materials for them. And last but not least, I will reveal the way how to make these nice ropes with visible hairs. The fun part starts in the composition section of the tutorial. I will show you the best way how to put things together in a smart way, while each step has a clear meaning and results from a thoughtful process, not just a random attempt. If you master this composition technique, you will no longer rely only on your luck or the wish that everything somehow turns out well in the end. You will be able to take control in your own hands. In this chapter, you will also learn how to light the scene, render it with the proper rendering settings, set the camera to create a desired depth of field, and you will learn how to enhance the image in the post-process in Blender Compositor. As you can see, the scene looks pretty simple. We have a few trees with fine leaves, some branches, and glass jars. The trees are made with the Groove add-on. They have particle systems that distribute twigs, which give us full control over the number, size, and rotation of our twigs. I purchased the twigs from thegroove3d.com and now I'll create two variations of the model and prepare materials for Octane. Photoscanned branches are from Quixel Megascans. I exported them utilizing the Quixel Bridge application. Then I prepared materials and put several small branches together to make a more complex structure. The glass jar is from Chocofur. I converted Cycle's materials to octanes and added the strings that are holding the jar in the air. These strings or ropes look very realistic thanks to the displacement texture and hairs that were created with the particle system. Lighting is provided only through an HDR texture. I have two light setups. One goes to Octane environment socket and serves as a light source. The second one goes to Octane visible environment socket and provides a background. The camera has 48mm focal length and the f-stop number has the value of 3. The render settings are straightforward. Kernel type is path tracing, the number of samples for the final render is 1500. Max diffuse, glossy and scatter depth are set to 30. GI clamp is 1, adaptive samplings is enabled with preset numbers, and the rest of the settings have default values. Blender's inbuilt color management is disabled, so it doesn't interfere with the render. Octane's color management has response type Portra 800 CD, exposure set to 12, gamma is 0.7, vignetting has value 0.6, and hot pixel removal is set to 0.75. Post-process is performed in Blender Compositor. We have nodes for controlling the glare effect, highlights and shadows, color, contrast, and also the node that sharpens the image is here. In the preparation phase, during which I was discovering the best ways how to create close-up nature shots in Blender, I made a few final renders which will now serve us as examples for explaining several individual issues. If you look at these images, you may think that it's just all about a randomly placed camera looking at the randomly placed leaves, branches, and a glass jar. However, nothing is farther away from the truth. Almost everything here is carefully and purposefully arranged in order to fulfill a particular task in the overall composition. Of course, you can just randomly try and move the camera and the objects until the image will look good to you. However, if you are aware that there are some rules you should follow and understand, you can significantly fast forward this process, save a lot of time, and achieve much better results because you simply won't rely only on coincidence anymore. However, I would define these compositional techniques as guidelines rather than rules. The reason is that in the creative process of producing images, there are no absolute rules that you must apply to all of your images. You can always break some rules, but only if you precisely know why you are doing it. Let's try to analyze this image from the composition point of view. As I already mentioned in my previous tutorial, a good shot must have foreground, middle ground, and background. This basic principle is well preserved also in this image. We have the background. Here is the middle ground where the main elements are placed, and this is the foreground. It's a very simple rule, and if you follow this structure, your images will be immediately better. The next rule you should follow is the rule of thirds. This rule is based on the theory that a human eye does not naturally gravitate to the middle of the image, what could be a logical assumption, but instead it aims to the intersection points that occur when an image is split into thirds. The rule of thirds represents a simple composition advice. Divide your image into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, and place important compositional elements on or near the imaginary lines and also where the lines intersect. The word near is crucial here because you shouldn't strictly obey this rule in every case and in every situation. This rule is just a shortcut, but in the end, it is you who have to find out the best place where your items need to be placed according to the specifics of your image. In this render, you can see that the main object followed this rule almost perfectly. In Blender, under the camera settings and in the viewport display section, you can enable multiple composition guides that will help you position your objects. The option called thirds is exactly what you need to follow the rule that we have just discussed. The next rule I applied to this image is called framing. As the term suggests, the purpose of this technique is to create a frame around the main compositional elements, so the eye is attracted directly to them. For that purpose, I used these leaves in the foreground. In this case, it created just a subtle effect, but still, it plays an important role in the whole composition. Another trick I use for this image is called leading lines. Lines are a powerful element of composition in photography. The concept behind of the leading lines is to use the visual power of the line to direct your viewer where he should look, and also add some depth to the image. Can you see these nice photoscan branches? Their presence in the scene isn't accidental. I wanted to encourage the realistic impression of the image by utilizing photoscan models, but that wasn't my only intention. I also used them as leading lines towards the key elements in the image. On top of that, they encourage the depth of the render as well. One more thing I used for this render that significantly helped the composition and overall image quality is the depth of field with a low f-stop number. Using a small f number provides a shallow depth of field, which means that only a small part of the image is in the focus. Why would you want to achieve this outcome? The most important reason is that your eye will naturally aim towards whatever is in focus in photography. We usually assume that if something is out of the focus, then we aren't supposed to look at it. Simply said, you can use a shallow depth of field to force your viewer to look at the subject of your choice. The first thing to make a lovely nature close-up render is to have some nature around, or even better, 3D models representing nature. There are many different ways how to obtain them. You can model them by yourself or search for some free models on the internet. For example, we have a few nice trees and bushes that you can download for free. Or another way is to buy some realistic 3D greenery models. Before I have started working on this tutorial, I tried several different sources of greenery models, with a goal in mind to find the best one for that project. In the beginning, I took a few of trees that we are selling. I made some nice detailed shots and I was quite satisfied with the quality for a while. But then I went closer and closer, and the 3D model started to look like a 3D model, not like a real life tree. However, I wanted to go very close to leaves for that specific project and achieve uncompromised quality. So I needed models with all the tiny details that provide realistic feeling coming from, especially leaves and twigs. You know, I would be happy to tell you that our trees are the best for any purpose, but my ultimate goal is to provide the best information for you, even at the cost that you will buy assets from other suppliers. So, as my investigation continued, I tried trees from Evermotion, Max Tree, or other shops. The overall quality was very similar to our trees. They look great until you go a few centimeters close. Then I remembered the growth add-on, which I bought a few years ago, and now I decided to give it another chance. It's a powerful tree simulator with handy functions that are perfect for this specific project. The add-on utilizes detailed realistic twigs that you can buy on their site. Twigs are distributing with particle systems, which is perfect because we have full control over them. The add-on offers many presets, so you can make a basic tree very easy without reading the manual. On the other hand, several problems come with the add-on, and that's why I use these trees just for close-ups, or on the other hand, for filling the background. The first thing is that it is pretty hard to get a truly natural shape of the tree. I made up to 100 trees with the add-on, but I wasn't fully satisfied with the tree's overall look. They seem to be a bit generic without some individual imperfections. However, maybe I didn't spend enough time with that add-on, so it's just my lack of experience that I can't get a satisfying result. Fortunately, it isn't a problem for close-up renders because in this situation we see only a small portion of the tree. Another problem that bothers me is that the add-on tries to mimic how nature built a tree, which sounds like a great idea, but the result is that You have too many sliders with not very intuitive functions. Of course, you don't have to change the settings and go with the default, and you will get a quite good result. Still, if you want to go deeper and have full control over the tree, it takes a lot of time to try of all of the sliders and even more to understand how the tree will look like when you increase value here and decrease value there, because they influence each other. Having said that, I still think that this add-on provides excellent value for specific situations, and I don't regret the money I spent on it. My conclusion is that for close-up tree renders, the best solution is to use growth add-on with detailed twigs and leaves. However, when the whole tree is visible, it is better to go with trees with photoscan textures, interesting imperfections, and a generally more natural looking shape. The installation is pretty simple. You download the file from the site, unpack it, go to the Blender, open Blender Preferences, go to the add-on section, click to install, find the folder with the unpacked add-on, and click to zip file. Now we need to activate the add-on, save changes, and can use it. Hit N, find the Grove add-on bookmark, and click to add a new Grove. I use version 8. This add-on is rapidly evolving, so maybe there is already a new updated version. This add-on has plenty of various settings to control the growth of your tree. To be honest, I am not entirely familiar with all of them. However, for the purpose of this tutorial, we need to use just a few settings because we don't need a complex tree, just a few branches so our leaves can grow from. Here, under the preset section, we can choose a type of tree we want to make. We have bird cherry leaves for this project, but there isn't such preset, so that I will go with magnolia. The next section is called twig. Here we can pick one of our twig models and later we will replace it with the whole collection of leaves in particle system settings. You can change density to 1 and finally we can hit the growth button and voila, we have a lovely small tree. Click again and maybe one more time. If you want, you can create a giant tree or play with other settings. If you don't like the tree, you can hit regrow and you will get a new version, or click restart and simulate your tree again. One more thing that we have to do is to animate the movement of branches and leaves of the tree, so we can utilize it later for the animation. Go to the wind section, click animate so you can see how it works. Wait a moment. The wind is too strong, so we should decrease the strength and turbulence, and I would increase the number of shape keys to 100. Let's animate again. I think it's much better now, and you can still change it later in the animation settings. We need to prepare twigs with the leaves. Those will be later distributed with particle systems over our tree. The twigs you can see right now are purchased from thegroove3d.com. However, you can download the free models of twigs with leaves from our site. The link is in the description. These twigs are pretty good and detailed, but I will prepare two more versions of them so the repetition won't be so obvious. I'm duplicating the twig, going into edit mode and moving the leaves, rotating them, scaling them, so the result will be a new twig. The next issue we need to address is material for leaves. Since these twigs are originally prepared for cycles, we have to adjust them for Octane engine. Start the preview rendering. For lighting, I use HDR texture from HDR Heaven. Delete cycles node, add universal material, add image texture node. Search for bird cherry top texture, plug it into albedo color and transmission socket. The essential thing you have to do when working on materials like leaves, fabric, paper, etc. is to change the transmission type from specular to diffuse. As you can see, translucency is much more natural now. Sometimes, when you want to zoom in to an object very closely, part of the model will be cut off. It's called clipping, but you can easily change it. Hit N, click View, and change clip start to a lower number, 1 millimeter for example. Now you can go much closer to the object. I want to add a color correct node to adjust translucency. If you take a look at trees' leaves in reality, when the sun is behind them, you see that the color of the bottom is much lighter and vivid than at the top. To imitate this effect, we need to increase brightness and saturation and maybe adjust here a bit. Remember that the best way how to adjust your materials correctly is to have a real object in your hands and look at it in similar light conditions. We have only color texture available for this model, so we have to utilize it also for roughness. Copy the texture node and add a gradient texture node to control it. If you plug it also into the albedo color socket, you will see how your texture looks like after correction with gradient node. More black color means less roughness, and more white color means the opposite. An ordinary leaf should have a similar amount of roughness on each part, so I will reduce the texture contrast a bit. When it comes down to specular, I would like to create an effect that the leaf is a bit dirty. So some parts of the leaf are more specular than the others. I will do it with a dirt texture from my library, but you can also use procedural textures. Again, use a gradient texture node and play with it. The next thing is a bump socket. I will use a leaf color texture and a gradient texture node again. We need to prepare an opacity texture, switch to Photoshop or the other image editor, and fill the leaves with black color. Save as JPEG and plug the texture to opacity socket. I want to further enhance the leaf material with color randomness. So there would be no two twigs with the exact same color on our tree. Add a mix texture node, add a gradient texture, and a random color texture node. Now connect the mix texture node between the color texture and the color correct texture node. And also connect the mix texture node to albedo color. In the next step, plug the gradient texture to the mix texture node and the random color texture to the gradient texture node. Now we can play with these colors, but to really see the effect of randomness, we need to have more leaves, so let's copy them. Now you can notice that each duplicate has a color from the spectrum. The color of leaves is the combination of the color texture and the color gradient. Random color node randomly decides about what color is going to mix with the texture. And now let's adjust it for our leaves. Change the amount to 0.96 or 97 to create just a subtle color tint. As you can see, we have two color textures for the leaves called bird cherry top and bird cherry bottom, which indicates that we should create different material for the top side and the bottom side of the leaf. Select and copy the whole node setup, move it under the first one, change textures to bird cherry bottom, and mix it with the mix material node. As a factor, we will use a polygon side texture node. Now, if I change something in the bottom material setup, you can see that it will affect only the leaf's bottom side. In the real world, the bottom sides of leaves are slightly different than the top sides. Colors are less saturated and veins are more visible. However, I still want to achieve a nice vivid color for the translucent effect, so for the transmission socket, I will use the bird cherry top texture. One more thing that will significantly improve realistic impression of our leaves is the handmade displacement texture that we are going to create now. However, before that, I would like to explain you how the displacement texture actually works. It's very easy. Displacement texture is bending your mesh according to color values of the texture. Let's see. We have this black and white image and I'm going to use it as displacement texture for this plane. Throw it to Blender, add texture displacement node and connect to displacement socket. And we see nothing because we have to increase the height. And now you see that our mesh is bended based on the image. It's worked like a magic, especially when I compare it with cycles. There it is so much more complicated to create a nice displacement effect, and also cycles would eat a big chunk of your memory to make it possible. However, Octane doesn't need any extra memory for displacement. Alright, it was a quick demonstration of how the displacement works in Octane. Now back to our leaves. As you can see, the leaves are too flat, so I want to make them more bumpy. Jump to Photoshop or GIMP or just take a pencil and paper. We are going to draw a texture that will bend the mesh of leaves. I spent a few hours with that, so this is just a quick insight of how I did it. This is my result. Of course, I could do it more precisely, but I rely on the fact that nobody exactly know how it should look because each leaf on the planet is original. Alright, we have our displacement texture done. Now we can go back to Blender and use it. Remember that when you mix more materials, you have to plug displacement texture to the mix node instead of universal shader. So add texture and texture displacement node and connect to displacement. Change resolution according to resolution of the texture. Also change displacement direction to follow smoothed normal. And find the appropriate value for height. We have to fix those little stems, which now are looking pretty crazy. I will make new material, copy material setup of leaves, delete displacement, and assign this material to stems. Okay, the material for leaves is ready. The next assets we need to set up are Photoscanned branches. There are many sites where you can find good Photoscanned models, but I definitely prefer Quixel Megascans. I think they have the largest library of Photoscanned assets in very good quality. And on top of that, you can download Quixel Bridge, which is an application that connects their library with your Blender. One click and you have an asset in Blender with all materials prepared. Unfortunately, it's not free. You have to choose one of the offered plans, but pricing is more than fair in comparison to the added value you will get in return. Enough talking, let's take a look at it. We need some branches, so go to the 3D assets, nature, tree, and branch. Here you can see branches I already purchased. Let's take one of them to Blender and prepare for our project. Click export and tada, we have the model here. However, you need to have an add-on called Octane Helper installed first. It was created by Yichendo. Sorry man, I probably didn't pronounce your name correctly. That add-on has many great features and one of them cooperates well with Quixel Bridge and translate materials for Octane. Look at our branch. As you can see, we have basic material prepared thanks to the add-on, but the material output is missing. Probably it's some kind of a bug. Maybe there is already an updated version of this add-on, but never mind, we need just a few clicks to edit it. Alright, change specular to 0.2, change gamma in the normal map to 1, and let's look at displacement. It seems to be not working properly. Of course, we have to apply the scale, hit Ctrl A, and apply rotation and scale. Nice, and now decrease the height. In the same way, I prepared 4 different branches and put them together. It's quite funny that our tree has a magnolia structure, bird cherry leaves, and these branches come from a spruce. Never mind, I'm not a biologist. The next model we need to work on is the main element of our scene, a glass jar. You know, I always strive for the most effective ways of how to reach a certain goal. It means that I don't model most of the assets I work with. Instead, I try to find an appropriate model on the internet. If I can't find it, I try to use a similar one, and only if there isn't any other way, so only then I model things by myself. Yes, I'm lazy, but thanks to this approach, I'm able to produce images fast and I don't waste my time modeling something that someone else already did. The same applies to this jar. I found this model in my library, therefore I won't show you how to model it, but I'm sure that YouTube is full of videos describing the process of how to model similar objects. Although, what I want to show you is how to prepare these nice strings holding the jar in the air. Switch to edit mode, select this loop, duplicate it, press P, and make a separate object out of it. Then convert this object to a curve, go to the curve settings, increase the depth, scale this torus a bit, and convert back to mesh. In a similar way, I'll prepare the second string and the third one as well. Alright, so we can focus on materials. Chrome is very quick, just increase metallic to 1. Glass is also easy to make, but here I'll add also an imperfection texture. Plug it into roughness and play with the gradient texture a bit. Then plug it also into bump. Now let's look at the strings. We have here nice textures from polygon.com, but I think we have to play with unwrapping a bit. Connect a normal texture, a roughness texture, adjust specularity, but the most important thing here is a displacement texture. Add a texture displacement node, change the resolution of the texture, and change the displacement direction to follow smoothed normal. Now we can also adjust the thickness of our string. And as a final touch, I add hairs to our string so it looks more natural. At first, we need to prepare models of the hairs that we will distribute with the particle system. So, add a curve. I will make 4 versions, add some depth to them, convert back to mesh, and maybe sharpen the tip. Each hair must have an origin point at the root. For the hair's material, I'll choose the same material our strings are made of, but without displacement. Then I'll add all the hairs into one collection. Now select our string, go to the particle panel, change type to hair. In the render section choose collection and select our collection called hairs. Enable advanced option so we can rotate our hairs. Now just a few adjustments. In the rotation section change orientation to normal and play with randomize. One more thing I would like to do is to connect albedo texture also to transmission socket and change transmission type to diffuse. And I think we are done here. Our models for the scene are ready, so let's start putting it all together. Usually, I try to keep the composition process very systematic. The composition of the current project, I will start with the largest objects, big trees, to fill the most of the canvas. Then I will add smaller trees so I can work more precisely on the composition. In the next step, I will place the glass jar, photoscanned branches, and in the end, I will polish my composition with individual leaves. The idea behind this approach is that you divide the scene into several layers and you don't add a new layer until you are satisfied with the previous one. In that way, you can always go back one step, remove the latest layer, and continue from the previous one. And doesn't matter what are you working on. You can utilize this approach for interiors, the wide landscape shots, as well as for close-ups. Following our analysis, I will divide the composition into three parts: foreground, middle ground, and background. And I start with the middle ground. Add a camera and place it somewhere here. I want to show you a few settings. Firstly, the lighting. I use just an HDR map. This one is called Ruito Park 4K HDR and is from hdrheaven.com. I can add a full transform node which allows me to rotate the HDR. Next, look at the Octane camera imager settings. Override is enabled. I'm going to change response type to Portra 800 CD. That's my favorite one. Gamma change to 1 and exposure to 3. Just for now, we will go back to it later. Maybe we can also use vignetting, but just a bit. Okay, and the rest of the settings are fine so far. Let's look at the Octane kernel settings. Nothing special here. I use path tracing as always, GI clamp is 1, and depth of samplings is enabled. If you want to know more about the Octane kernel settings, take a look at my previous tutorial called From Cycles to Octane. We can try to rotate the tree and search for the most interesting angle, move a camera a little bit, enable composition guides, viewport display, composition guides, thirds. And we can't see anything because I have to enable show overlays. Now we can place the cursor somewhere here and add an empty object that will be our focus point. Go to the Octane camera section, enable use f-stop, and as a focus object choose the empty object. And also change the f-stop number to 1. Now I duplicate the tree and place it closer to the camera. It will be part of the foreground. Let's try to find the best position for this new tree. I would like to scale the size of the leaves down, so I go to particle settings, and as you can see there are 3 users sharing these settings. It means that 3 of our trees have the same particle settings. However, I want to make changes only to this particular tree. I have to click on this button with number 3 And now I can change the scale or anything else, and those changes won't influence other three particle systems. Let's try to make a preview render. I see that I have to increase the f-stop number so our depth of field isn't so dramatic. I think we are done with the first composition layer and I can add a new one. My goal is to make the foreground look like a frame around our focus point. And to have a better control, I need to simulate one more tree, but much smaller. Open a new blend file, go to Groove addon, and click Grow. Alright, let's copy and paste it to our scene. Now you can see that we have a nice frame of darker blurry leaves formed around the composition center. Alright, and make the test render again. What I like about Groove add-on is that you have full control over the distribution of leaves. You can easily change the number, scale, rotation, or even replace twigs with different ones. Let's say that I don't want to have this twig here. I can go to edit mode and delete the part of the branch from which the twig is growing. At the beginning of the composition process, I like to work separately on foreground, middle ground and background. But then, when I have the positions for the main elements defined, I'm continuously shifting from one point to another and work on the whole scene simultaneously. Let's try another HDR texture. However, I'm quite satisfied with the lighting. I don't want to lose the settings, so I duplicate the whole node setup and make changes in the new copy. This way, the first one stays untouched and I will be able to get back to it later. I'm looking for the HDR where the sun is low, for example that one, Greenwich Park from HDR Heaven. Now I have to deal with a very commonly occurring problem. I like the way how HDR lights the scene, but I don't like the background which HDR provides. I mean these trees or whatever it is. Fortunately, we can modify it and have an individual node setup for lighting and separate node setup for backplate, reflections or refractions. Duplicate the world node setup and connect it to Octane's visible environment socket. Now we can freely change the rotation of the HDR in order to find the best looking background and our lighting stays the same. I want to have more leaves here in the middle ground, so I will copy this small tree and put it somewhere here. One more thing I forgot to do is to create material for tree bark. Let's do it quickly now. Add universal shader, find some bark texture, plug it to albedo, plug it to bump, and adjust specular and roughness. You know, these branches won't be visible in detail, therefore I won't spend a lot of time working on them. Let's continue with our composition. I'll prepare a small branch with just a few leaves and I will use it to perfect the composition. Duplicate the tree, unlink the particle settings, go to edit mode, delete part of the tree, and adjust the number of leaves. Alright, I think it's time to copy our main element to the scene. Maybe we can crop the shot a bit. We will do it with the focal length, change it to 60 or maybe 65. There is a saying running in the community of photographers that says, go close and then go even closer. It means that you shouldn't have a lot of empty space around your main object. In order to balance the composition and evoke the idea that there are more similar glass jars swinging in the tree, I duplicate our jar and place it in the background, approximately to the intersection of the composition guides. In the next step, we can enable Octane post-process. I would like the sun to be somewhere here so we can get a nice glare effect. To manage that, I will change the HDR one more time. Now I will use Spruce Sunrise. I have to disable the post-processing pass in the passes section. I think this thing doesn't work properly here in Octane. Because if the post-process pass is enabled, you can adjust the post-processing in the compositor after your render is done. However, you don't see the glare effect in the viewport rendering. So you have to disable the pass, but then you must remember for it for the final render. Before the final render, you must to enable it. I don't like it. There is too much thinking involved. Never mind, now we can see the glare effect and adjust it a bit. The glare blur slider does exactly what you think it does, and spectral intensity seems to bring colors into the glare. Alright, this is what I have so far, and in the next step I'm going to add a new layer, Photoscanned branches, that we prepared earlier. They will have multiple purposes here in the scene. The first one is that high quality photoscanned models can highly increase the realistic impression of your renders. If there is an option to use photoscanned assets, models, or textures, I highly recommend always go this way. We can also use these branches to balance the composition, and finally, we can use them as leading lines. We talk about them in the first part of this tutorial. This tutorial is radically shortened. I don't show you every minute I spend on moving and rotating things, because those are all repetitive tasks and you won't learn anything new by watching them. I'm going to add a new element to our scene, a single tweak, so we can precisely control the composition. I think the scene is ready for the final rendering, and then we can focus on post-processing. Before rendering, we have to go to the passes section and enable the Noiser Beauty and post-processing pass. That's how our final render looks like. And now let's see if we can enhance it in the compositor. As the first thing, plug Octane Denoiser Beauty Pass, then bring out the glare effect. Search for color and the mix node, connect it here and change the blending mode to screen. We have the glare effect and we can easily control its intensity. Next, add a color correction node. With this node, I would like to balance the highlights and the shadows. I'll decrease the gamma of the shadows. As a result, the contrast will be a bit stronger, and perhaps I can decrease the gain a bit. But generally, I quite like the image, so there isn't a lot of things to do anymore. Next, I'll add a new color correction node, and now I will separate just the blue color. I want to create a nice blue tint for the image, so I'll increase gain, gamma, and saturation a bit. Then I'll add one more color correction node. I will separate the red color and also increase gamma gain and saturation. I can select everything, hit M, so we can see the image before and after post-processing. The last thing I want to do is to add a sharper node and make the image crispier. That's all guys for this tutorial. I hope that you learned something new and enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and give us a like. If you have some questions about Blender, Octane, or anything else, write them down in the comment section below. We will try to answer you soon. If you would like to support us, go to 3dshaker.com, where you can find many great 3D models prepared for Blender. With your help, we can create more 3D assets, do better tutorials, and maybe I will finally start to learn how to speak English properly. Have a great day and see you next time.